on, boys! The way you're lollygagging around here with them picks and them shovels, you'd think it was 120 degrees.
What if the wildest comedy of the 1970s only works because of the quietest performance on screen? Blazing Saddles is packed with chaos, slapstick and satire, but hidden in plain sight is a role that holds it all together. It's not the loudest, not the flashiest, and yet, without it the film might have fallen apart. Gene Wilder's Waco Kid isn't just a supporting character, he's the calm at the center of the storm, and once you see what he really did.
The scene of Madeline Kahn in the dressing room with Cleven Little has become an integral part of the movie Blazing Saddles.
You'll never watch the film the same way again. For decades, Blazing Saddles has been quoted, debated, and picked apart in countless film discussions, reviews, and retrospectives. It's one of those movies that seems like everyone's got a take on, whether it's about its satire, its boundary-pushing humor, or its impact on comedy. But despite all the analysis, there's a detail that many fans, even the most dedicated ones, have completely missed. And it's not a blink and you'll miss it cameo or some obscure production trivia hidden in the credits. Before we go any further, here's your reminder to subscribe to our channel, so you never miss out on your daily dose of TV bloopers. The detail in question is right there on screen, woven into the performance of one of the film's lead characters. It's not loud, it's not flashy, in fact, it's the opposite. It's so subtle that it's easy to miss, especially when surrounded by a film filled with slapstick, absurdity, and deliberate chaos. Gene Wilder, playing the Waco Kid, quietly delivered a performance that may have held the entire film together. And, for years, most people didn't even realize just how important it was. When Mel Brooks started shooting Blazing Saddles, the role of the Waco Kid wasn't supposed to be Wilder's. Originally, that part had already been cast. Gig Young, a respected actor who had won an Academy Award and had a long list of film credits, had signed on to play the retired gunslinger. On paper, Young seemed like the ideal choice. He had the gravitas to play a character who was world-weary and burnt out, a man who'd once been the fastest drawer in the West but had lost his edge. His casting made sense, at least initially, but things took a turn on day one of filming. From the very beginning, Gig Young struggled. According to people on set, he was sweating excessively, shaking noticeably, and having trouble getting through his lines. At first, some assumed he might have been using method acting to embody the Waco Kid's unsteady hands and hungover state. But it quickly became clear that something else was going on. In reality, Young was suffering from acute alcohol withdrawal. By mid-morning, he collapsed on set. The production was brought to a halt, and the studio had an urgent problem to solve. One of its lead actors was no longer able to continue filming. It wasn't a matter of creative differences or minor setbacks. Young's health simply didn't allow him to continue. This left Brooks with an empty role and a tight schedule, not to mention a film that was already at risk of spiraling before it had even properly begun. Instead of launching a new casting process or turning to agents, Brooks made a direct call. He reached out to Gene Wilder, someone he had worked with before on The Producers. Wilder and Brooks had a strong working relationship, and more importantly, Brooks trusted him. According to Brooks in later interviews, Wilder didn't hesitate. He didn't ask to read the script, didn't inquire about pay, and didn't demand any specific conditions. He simply said yes. Within a day, Wilder was on set, jet-lagged and with no time to rehearse. He stepped into the role cold. No read-throughs, no preparation, just a character name and a costume. It sounds almost impossible, but this is how one of the film's most memorable performances came to life. It's tempting to look at this moment as a typical Hollywood save-the-day story, and on some level it is. Wilder did save the production from what could have been a disastrous early shutdown. But what he brought to the role wasn't just a functioning performance to fill a gap. He transformed the character into something far more layered and resonant than what had been originally imagined. Wilder's portrayal of the Waco Kid stood out not because he was trying to be funny, but because he wasn't. In a film filled with characters pushing the boundaries of absurdity, from Cleavon-Little's Sheriff Bart to the over-the-top villainy of Hedley Lamar, Wilder played his part with remarkable restraint. It was this choice that helped balance the tone of the film. His Waco Kid wasn't another clown in the circus, but more of a quiet observer, someone who had already seen the madness and decided to sit slightly outside of it. What makes this even more impressive is the speed with which Wilder inhabited the character. Most actors have weeks, sometimes months, to work on a role, learning the lines, building the character, understanding the backstory. Wilder had hours, and yet when the camera started rolling, he was completely in control. He found the character's rhythm almost instantly, delivering lines with a dry wit and a subtlety that contrasted sharply with the rest of the cast. One of the reasons Wilder was able to do this was because he wasn't trying to compete with the film's louder moments. Instead of playing for laughs, he grounded the Waco Kid in a kind of sad dignity. There's a calmness to the character, a kind of exhausted wisdom that gives the comedy around him a center to orbit. Without that, it's not hard to imagine the film veering off into pure farce. In later interviews, Mel Brooks acknowledged that Wilder's approach altered the character in ways that ultimately benefited the film. If Gig Young had stayed in the role, it's likely that the Waco Kid would have been played more traditionally, as a gruff, alcoholic ex-gunslinger. But Wilder's version was different. He brought a philosophical edge to the character, someone who was clearly damaged but still capable of insight and humor. This shift wasn't written into the script. It came entirely from how Wilder chose to play the part. And this was no accident. Wilder made a conscious decision to play the role straight. He didn't want to add to the noise. In fact, before he even stepped onto the set, he had one condition: he would not play the character for laughs. This was crucial. Wilder recognized that his best contribution would be to act as a counterweight to the film's chaos. His stillness would make everyone else's energy feel sharper. His silence would make the jokes land harder. The impact of that decision can't be overstated. Comedy is often about timing and contrast, and Wilder provided both. In scenes where he speaks quietly or barely reacts, the surrounding madness becomes even funnier. His presence allowed the louder elements of the film to thrive without overwhelming the story. And even though he wasn't shouting for attention, Wilder's performance is often the one people remember most vividly after the credits roll. It also raises a broader question. Was Wilder always the right person for the role, even if he wasn't the first choice? There's no definitive answer to that, but many involved with the film, including Brooks, have suggested that once Wilder stepped in, there was no going back. It just worked. What started as a last-minute solution turned into one of the most iconic performances in comedy history. There is something almost mythic about the way Wilder took over the part. The speed, the lack of preparation, the effortless control. It's the kind of story that becomes legend in filmmaking circles. But unlike many legends, this one is well documented and supported by those who were there. The cast and crew recognized immediately that something special had happened. Looking back, it's clear that Gene Wilder's performance as the Waco Kid wasn't just an emergency fix. It was a defining moment for the film. His arrival changed the tone, elevated the material, and introduced a kind of depth that many comedies lack. He didn't just fill a gap, he reshaped the space entirely. According to Mel Brooks, before Wilder even flew out to join the production, he made one thing clear: he didn't want to play the Waco Kid for laughs. He understood that the film already had plenty of loud, outrageous performances, and the last thing it needed was another actor trying to compete for attention. Instead, Wilder wanted to create something different, something quieter. He was drawn to the contrast, and he saw an opportunity to do something more nuanced, within the chaos. This choice wasn't just a matter of personal preference, it was based on a deep understanding of how comedy works. Wilder recognized that in order for the wild moments in the film to really land, they needed something to bounce off. If everyone was big and exaggerated, the effect would become numbing. But by staying calm and restrained, his character could actually make the surrounding madness funnier. His stillness became the backdrop that made the noise stand out. Take the Waco Kid's first major scene, the one where he's introduced slouched in a jail cell. It's a classic example of Wilder's approach. He barely moves, speaks in a low voice, and shows almost no facial expression. But every line lands. The humor doesn't come from him trying to be funny, it comes from the unexpectedness of his delivery. In a film that constantly pushes boundaries, there's something oddly compelling about a character who seems almost uninterested in drawing attention to himself. This kind of performance relies heavily on timing, and Wilder had it in spades. He understood when to pause, when to speak, and when to let a moment breathe. That level of control isn't easy, especially in comedy, where the temptation is often to go bigger and louder to get a reaction. But Wilder's restraint made those moments more impactful. His jokes didn't shout. They snuck up on you. It's not just fans who have noticed this. Mel Brooks himself has repeatedly credited Gene Wilder's quiet performance as being the glue that held Blazing Saddles together. In interviews, he said that without Wilder's calm presence, the film might have collapsed under its own weight. The more absurd the story became, the more necessary it was to have someone in the cast who could keep it grounded. Wilder provided that balance. There's also something emotionally honest about the way he played the Waco Kid. He didn't lean into the caricature of a drunk or a washed-up cowboy. Instead, he gave the character a sense of weariness that felt real. When the Waco Kid talks about losing his nerve, or when his hand shakes as he lifts a drink, there's a depth to it. It's funny, yes, but it's also slightly sad. Wilder managed to suggest that there was more to the character's past than we were being told, and he did it without a single flashback or dramatic monologue. That emotional weight helped separate Blazing Saddles from being just another spoof. While other characters existed mostly for the sake of jokes or plot points, the Waco Kid felt like a person. A strange, tired, possibly broken person, but a person nonetheless. And that hint of reality made the satire sharper. It reminded the audience that underneath all the absurdity, there were real themes at play, about race, violence, regret, and disillusionment with American mythology. Interestingly, Wilder's decision to play it straight may have been influenced by his own personality and acting style. People who worked with him often described him as thoughtful, quiet, and emotionally sensitive. He wasn't the kind of performer who tried to dominate a scene or outshine his co-stars. Instead, he was collaborative and focused on finding the emotional truth of a moment, even in comedy. This personal philosophy shows up clearly in his performance. The Waco Kid doesn't try to be the center of attention. He reacts more than he acts. He listens, observes, and comments when necessary, but never overreaches. Even when delivering some of the film's funniest lines, like the now famous "morons" speech, he stays composed. His delivery is dry, even bored, and that's exactly what makes it funny. That line, "You've got to remember these are just simple farmers, people of the land, the common clay of the new West, morons," is a perfect example of how Wilder used tone and contrast. It's not just what he says, but how he says it. The line wouldn't have worked nearly as well if it had been delivered with a grin or a wink, but because he says it so plainly, as if he's just stating a fact, it becomes hilarious. The absurdity speaks for itself. Wilder doesn't need to push it. This style of performance was risky. In a less skilled actor's hands, it might have come across as flat or unengaged, but Wilder had the experience and instincts to know when to pull back and when to lean in. He understood the rhythm of comedy, not just in terms of timing, but in terms of emotional flow. He let the scenes unfold naturally, trusting the material and his fellow actors, rather than trying to steal focus. Behind the scenes, this approach also posed practical challenges. According to accounts from the set, Wilder's quiet delivery often caught the crew off guard. He was so subtly funny that people behind the camera would struggle to hold in their laughter, ruining takes. Mel Brooks himself reportedly had to be removed from set during certain scenes because he couldn't stop laughing off screen. The issue wasn't with Wilder's performance, it was with everyone else trying to keep a straight face around him. This speaks to the power of contrast in comedy, a principle Wilder seemed to understand intuitively. By not competing with the chaos, he made it funnier. His deadpan responses made Cleavon Little's energy feel sharper. His silence made the punchlines pop. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he made everyone else sound better by comparison. It's also worth noting that some of Wilder's more emotionally rich moments didn't make it into the final film. Crew members have spoken about scenes that explored more of the Waco kid's backstory, offering greater insight into his trauma and disillusionment. These scenes were reportedly cut for pacing reasons, as the film leaned more into fast-paced comedy. Still, the fragments that remain are enough to sense the complexity Wilder brought to the role. There's a lasting impact to this kind of performance. Over time, as the broader jokes and physical comedy start to feel dated or overplayed, it's Wilder's stillness that continues to resonate. His version of the Waco Kid isn't just a source of humor. He's a character that lingers in the memory. You start to think about what might have happened to him before the events of the film, why he ended up where he did, and what he sees when he watches the madness unfold around him. This depth, subtle as it is, plays a big part in why Blazing Saddles has endured for so long. Many comedies make you laugh in the moment and then fade away. But the ones that stick around, that people return to and talk about for decades, usually have something more. Wilder gave the film that something more. He gave it a sense of grounding and heart that balanced out its wildest moments. One of the biggest what-ifs in the film's history involves Richard Pryor. Before Blazing Saddles went into production, Pryor wasn't just connected to the film, he was deeply involved. He was one of the co-writers and, in the early stages, he was also the preferred choice to play Sheriff Bart. Mel Brooks had pushed hard for Pryor, knowing that his raw humor and unique voice could bring something genuinely new to the screen. At the time, Pryor was already gaining a reputation as a fearless comedian, someone unafraid to tackle race, politics, and uncomfortable truths through his comedy. His casting would have added an extra layer of intensity and realism to the film's commentary on race and the American West. However, the studio had other ideas. Executives at Warner Bros. Were hesitant to cast Pryor because of his public controversies, particularly surrounding drug use and some of his offstage behavior. Despite his talent and the backing of Brooks, they decided it was too much of a risk. In the end, Cleavon Little was chosen to play Bart, while Pryor remained on board as a writer. This decision would alter the entire chemistry of the film. Although Little gave a strong performance and brought a smooth charisma to the role, many have wondered what Blazing Saddles would have looked like with Pryor and Wilder sharing the screen. Gene Wilder himself later spoke about this missed opportunity. He didn't criticize the studio directly, but he did reflect on what the film could have been if Pryor had played Bart. Wilder and Pryor would eventually go on to form one of the most iconic comedy duos in film history, starring together in Silver Streak, Stir Crazy, and See No Evil, Hear No Evil. Their dynamic was electric. Wilder's calm, measured delivery played perfectly off Pryor's energy and improvisational genius. If that partnership had started with Blazing Saddles, the tone of the film might have shifted in a different direction. That said, Wilder never seemed bitter about how it turned out. Instead, he acknowledged that the timing of their collaborations ended up being right in its own way. Still, it's impossible not to imagine how Blazing Saddles might have felt with those two sharing more screen time. The contrast between Pryor's explosive presence and Wilder's quiet performance would likely have added another layer of texture to the film. There's a particular kind of chemistry they had together, a natural back-and-forth rhythm that few comedy pairs have ever matched. Even without Pryor on screen, his influence is deeply embedded in the film. Many of the sharpest lines, especially those tackling racism and power structures, carry his tone and sensibility. The humor isn't just outrageous for the sake of it, it cuts, and it often cuts close to real issues. Pryor had a gift for threading serious commentary through laughter, and that skill shaped the voice of Blazing Saddles. Several cast members and writers have confirmed over the years that some of the most biting dialogue came directly from Pryor, even if his name wasn't front and center. Wilder, for his part, credited Pryor for this. In interviews, he often pointed to the way Pryor's writing helped steer the film away from being just a spoof and into something more reflective of American society. He recognized that without Pryor, the film's racial satire might not have had the same sharp edge. Wilder didn't just see Pryor as a funny man, he saw him as someone with something meaningful to say, and that admiration informed their later work together. Beyond the casting and writing decisions, Wilder also played a quiet but important role during production. While Mel Brooks brought a whirlwind of energy and ambition to the set, the atmosphere wasn't always light. Making a film that pushed so many boundaries came with pressure. There were studio concerns, creative disagreements, and the unpredictable nature of working with such a large ensemble of comedians and character actors. In the middle of it all, Wilder became a kind of stabilizing force. He wasn't loud about it. In fact, most accounts describe Wilder as being calm, focused, and generous during filming. He didn't try to take over scenes or outshine anyone, but his presence helped ground the production. People who worked on the film have described him as the emotional anchor on set, someone who kept things steady when the energy started to spiral. His behavior off-camera mirrored his performance, quiet, supportive, and deeply aware of what the film needed. Wilde also mentored younger actors on set, though not in a formal or obvious way. He would give advice, tweak a line delivery, or offer a small note on timing or tone. These weren't grand speeches or dramatic interventions, just subtle, thoughtful contributions that helped shape performances without calling attention to himself. His experience from the theatre and earlier work with Brooks gave him a strong sense of pacing and rhythm, and he used that to support others in the cast. There's another side to Wilder's time on Blazing Saddles that isn't often mentioned. During filming, he started developing the idea that would eventually become Young Frankenstein. It began, reportedly, as a casual conversation with Mel Brooks between takes. Wilder floated the idea, what if the grandson of Dr. Frankenstein wanted nothing to do with the family's legacy? At first, Brooks wasn't interested. He was already stretched thin, focused entirely on finishing Blazing Saddles. But Wilder didn't let the idea go. He went home, wrote a draft, and brought it back to Brooks. When Brooks finally read it, he changed his mind. That small moment, an offhand thought shared during downtime on a chaotic set, became the seed for one of the most celebrated comedy films of the 1970s. It also marked a turning point in Wilder's career. Until then, he had mostly been known as an actor. With Young Frankenstein, he stepped fully into the role of writer and creative collaborator. He wasn't just performing someone else's vision anymore, he was helping shape the stories himself. The fact that Young Frankenstein emerged from the environment of Blazing Saddles says a lot about the creative energy between Brooks and Wilder. Despite the stress, the tight schedule, and the risks involved, the film created a space where new ideas could grow. That kind of collaboration is rare. It's even rarer for it to produce more than one classic film. But for Wilder and Brooks, it did. Their ability to trust each other, challenge each other, and build off one another's strengths led to some of the most memorable moments in comedy history. All of this, the missed opportunity with Pryor, the behind-the-scenes calm, the birth of a new film idea, reveals how Blazing Saddles was more than just a one-off comedy. It was a moment where several key figures in comedy converged, and their interactions had long-lasting effects. Gene Wilder didn't just show up, say his lines, and leave. He became part of the film's core, shaping not just what appeared on screen, but what grew from it. What's remarkable is that the sadness in the Waco Kid wasn't heavily scripted. The screenplay described him as a washed-up gunslinger, a drunk with shaky hands and a past he doesn't talk about. But Wilder chose to treat those elements seriously, not just as comedic beats. His character's tremors, his hollow stare, and his slow, deliberate movements all suggest someone who's been deeply affected by what he's seen. Rather than turning the Waco Kid into a cartoon, Wilder turned him into a person. A broken one maybe, but still recognizably human. This approach added layers to the film that most parodies don't attempt. While Blazing Saddles is full of farce and meta-comedy, the Waco Kid grounds it. His presence reminds the audience that underneath the jokes, there's a critique of something real. of the myths America tells itself about the West, of the violence those myths are built on, and of the emotional toll that violence leaves behind. Wilder never makes these points directly. He doesn't need to. They come through in the way he plays each scene. One example is the jailhouse scene where the Waco Kid describes how he lost his nerve. On the surface, it's funny. He tells the story of how he was once the fastest draw around until a 6-year-old shot him in the arse. The absurdity is obvious, but the way Wilder tells it, calmly, flatly, with a touch of sadness, gives the scene a completely different feel. It's not a story told for laughs. It's a story told by someone who's tired of being who he used to be. There's regret in his voice, not just sarcasm. These quieter moments are part of what made Wilder's performance so distinctive. He didn't treat the film's tone as an excuse to go broad. Instead, he leaned into restraint. He used silence just as effectively as dialogue. His pauses, his sideways glances, his subtle expressions. All of it worked to create a character who stood in contrast to the chaos around him. While others shouted, he stayed still. That stillness became a kind of commentary in itself. But playing the role with that level of control wasn't always easy, especially on a set known for its improvisation and unpredictable energy. According to several crew members, Wilder often had trouble getting through scenes, not because he broke character, but because everyone else did. His timing was so precise and his delivery so deadpan that cast and crew members couldn't stop laughing. Some takes had to be reshot multiple times because sound engineers or camera operators had ruined them by laughing during filming. Mel Brooks himself was occasionally asked to leave the set because his off-screen laughter was too loud. The humor didn't come from big gestures or punchlines. It came from how understated Wilder was. His lines would land in a way that took people by surprise. He wasn't trying to be funny in a traditional sense, which made him even funnier. That contrast between his seriousness and the absurd world around him created some of the film's most memorable moments. Not all of those moments made it into the final version of the film. Over the years, stories have emerged about deleted scenes involving the Waco Kid, scenes that apparently delved deeper into his backstory and internal struggles. These weren't cut because they didn't work, but because the film's pace was already packed with jokes and action. The studio was worried that too many slow, introspective moments might disrupt the flow. While these lost scenes remain mostly unseen, their absence hasn't erased the depth that Wilder brought to the character. Even in the moments that did make the final cut, there's a clear emotional undercurrent running through the Waco Kid. You can see it in the way he looks at Sheriff Bart. There's admiration there, but also caution. It's as if he's seen too many people try to make a difference and fail. His support of Bart feels genuine, but there's also a sense that he's holding back, protecting himself from the disappointment he's come to expect from the world. Then, none of this is said out loud, it's all in the performance. This kind of layered acting doesn't usually get much attention in comedy. Most people tend to focus on the laughs, the lines, the physical gags. But Wilder's work in Blazing Saddles shows that comedy can carry emotional weight. In fact, it often works better when it does. The laughs become richer when there's something real behind them. Wilder understood this, and he brought that understanding to the screen without making a big show of it. What's also impressive is how this quiet, thoughtful approach challenged Hollywood norms at the time. Comedy in the 1970s was full of bold personalities and over-the-top performances. The industry often rewarded actors who could dominate the screen with volume and energy. Wilder went in a different direction. He didn't try to overpower his co-stars or compete for attention. He made space for others by staying grounded. He trusted that the audience would notice the difference. That trust paid off. Over time, audiences have come to see the Waco Kid not just as a sidekick, but as the emotional center of Blazing Saddles. His stillness makes the absurdity around him feel sharper. His sadness adds a layer of truth that helps the film rise above being just a parody. In a movie filled with characters who break the fourth wall and wink at the camera, the Waco Kid never does. He stays in his world. That makes his presence feel more authentic, and it gives the film a surprising sense of weight. It also speaks to Wilder's overall philosophy about performance. He didn't believe that actors had to push to be noticed. He believed in listening, in reacting, in letting moments unfold naturally. This approach wasn't just about being subtle for the sake of it. It was about respecting the audience. Wilder trusted that people didn't need to be told what to feel. He gave them room to discover it for themselves. His off-screen actions reflected the same attitude. He wasn't known for making big demands or creating drama behind the scenes. Instead, he offered quiet support to those around him. During the filming of Blazing Saddles, he reportedly encouraged Mel Brooks to stay true to his vision, even when the studio pressured them to tone things down. He believed that the film's strength came from its honesty, even if that honesty made people uncomfortable. That kind of integrity isn't always loud, but it's powerful. Wilder's legacy from Blazing Saddles isn't just about delivering funny lines. It's about how he used his role to elevate the film as a whole. He proved that comedy doesn't have to be frantic or superficial to be effective. It can be thoughtful, controlled, and still hilarious. His performance became a lesson in contrast, showing that the quietest character can sometimes have the loudest impact. Looking back, it's clear that Blazing Saddles owes much of its staying power to Gene Wilder. Without his presence, the film might have tipped too far into chaos. His restraint gave it balance. His sadness gave it depth, and his commitment to the character gave it heart. While other performances grabbed attention with volume, Wilder's whispered. And in doing so, it still echoes today.